Hollen of Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Toomey. And I know there's some discussion about moving forward on the vote on the Fed nominations today. I hope we'll move forward on all five this afternoon. Ms. Liang, I've been monitoring some of the testimony. Welcome. And we do want to encourage innovation. I support that, but we also want to make sure that we protect consumers. You would agree?
Absolutely.
And I do want to focus on some of the things that could happen when things go wrong, where there are protections under our existing financial arrangements that do not apply to stablecoins, even though stablecoins are intended to be tied to a stable base. As you know, when it comes to the deposits in banks, we have the Federal Deposit Insurance Act that makes sure that consumers are protected up to some amount of their deposits, right? Is there any protection if the stablecoin issuer was to go belly up for consumers?
There currently, the protection would be provided by the quality of the assets that are held in reserve against the stablecoin, but there is not deposit insurance, but it would be.
But let me ask you
but
this.
They are not regulated.
Are there any standards with respect to what the reserves have to be?
No, there are no standards at this point.
Right. So currently, if the issuer were to go belly up, in other words, if they were to go out of business and they didn't have reserves to cover the deposits, the depositors, the holders of stablecoin would just be out of luck, right?
That's correct.
That's right. Okay. There are also protections that apply to consumers when it comes to transactions in things like credit cards or debit cards, right?
Yes.
And for example, if there are payment errors, fraud, or unauthorized transactions, then consumers have existing protections when they're dealing with credit cards or debit cards, right?
Correct.
And when it comes to stable coins, if there's some error, if there's some kind of fraud or unauthorized transaction or a hacking, are there any protections for the consumers of stablecoins?
So stablecoins are licensed under state money transmitter regimes, and there are consumer protection laws in those. They vary by state. They may apply to stablecoins in some states. They may not.
So right now it's hit or miss, depending on whether you're in a state that provides some protection and the extent of that protection. Is that right?
As I understand it, yes.
Right. So just to pick up on the question from Senator Warren, in terms of the work group, the presidential work group that was put together, clearly you identified some of the risks that we're talking about right now. Is that correct?
Correct.
And do you believe that the executive branch currently has the authority to move forward to protect consumers, for example, in the two areas I mentioned, right, with respect to some kind of stablecoin equivalent of depository insurance or national rules that protect consumers from errors or fraud? Do you believe that the administration, the executive branch, has the authority to regulate in that area, or is that an area that would require legislation?
I believe that is an area that would require legislation, that the risk of runs and the risk of payment system disruptions, including protections to consumers, is a gap in the current regulatory system.
And in response to Senator Warren, you indicated that there may be some areas where FSOC could move. What, if not these areas, can you describe some of the areas where you think you may have the authority to move at the executive branch level?
I don't. I think each agency will take actions consistent with their mandates, but it is not sufficient for the gap for the risks of runs and payment system. FSOC has some tools, but it is not a substitute. It would not provide a consistent, comprehensive framework. It could address particular risks as they arose, depending on the facts and circumstances. But it's not a comprehensive, consistent framework that legislation could provide.
And I hope you'll work with those of us on this committee who are interested in providing that kind of consumer protection regime and standards in this area.
Absolutely, we would be very happy to work on it.
Thank you.